Hello, I'm Rena, aka DuneFoxx. If you're new here, welcome, and if you've been here before, nice to see you again. Today, I'm going to be unboxing the quarter scale Satoru Gojo B-style figure from Freeing. I'm gonna go right in and talk about what you're probably curious about the most: how much this figure costs. This figure is listed with an MSRP of 62,700 yen, which roughly converts to 420 US dollars as of making this video, and I got mine from the US Goods Mail Company online store for 417 plus tax and shipping, which came out to a total of 530 US dollars. Compared to the Suguru Geto figure from the same line, he does come in cheaper by about 19,800 yen or 132 US dollars, but he is by no means cheap, though the Goods Mail Company online store seems to have the best price for him, since all the other US sites have him listed anywhere from 700 to 900 US dollars before tax and shipping. Also, Goods Mail Company gives you cute freebies with your purchase. I actually got this in quite late because I wasn't sure if I wanted to pick it up. But after unboxing the Suguru Geto one from the same line, I wanted to get this figure to match him. If you're interested in watching that unboxing, I'll leave a link somewhere in here. I wanted to get this video out as soon as possible, but unfortunately I was out of the country for a month, so forgive me if this video is 2 months late. For those of you wondering about the box he came in, this box is pretty big, as you can see. It's 365 millimeters in depth, 465 millimeters in width, and 665 millimeters in height, and the box weighed around 11 kilos. The figure itself is definitely huge, standing at 530 millimeters or 53 centimeters, and he is definitely visibly taller than the Suguru Geto figure from the same line. So let's do a little bit of fun math again. This is a quarter scale figure, which means it is a quarter of Satoru's actual height. That's listed as over 190 centimeters. And if you divide 190 centimeters by 4, you get 47.5 centimeters or 475 millimeters, and he's supposedly taller than this. At 530 millimeters, his base and his hair does make up quite a bit of that difference, so I guess it is to scale, sort of. Like I mentioned in the other video, compared to other B-style figures from Freeing, this is also definitely one of the more expensive ones. His price is a little easier to stomach than Suguru's, but it's still quite up there. And I'm not really sure if he is actually worth that price tag, because unlike Suguru, there are quite a few Satoru Gojo scale figures in the market to choose from. Maybe not exactly quarter scales, but there is a good selection of licensed figures out there. Back to the actual unboxing, the figure is packed really well, as you can see. There are multiple plastic layers and trays to keep all the parts from touching each other. The plastic trays are held securely with tape to keep them from separating and to prevent the pieces from moving around. And you'll see as I'm trying to get the pieces out that even after cutting and removing all the tape, it was pretty hard to separate the plastic tray, which is good because it prevents the smaller parts from accidentally falling out. And unlike the Suguru Geto figure from the same line, which came in one solid piece, Satoru's hand here is actually a separate piece, as well as his left foot that's attached to the base. His hand and main body are in the topmost tray. There are red translucent effect parts wrapped around his arm that could possibly break off if you set him down the wrong way. So if you have to set him aside, make sure he is facing downwards and put some foam to support his arm. The middle layer houses the base. There is a small plastic mold in the concave area of the red translucent effect part to protect it and keep it in place. The base has most of the red translucent effect parts attached to it, as well as his left foot, like I mentioned earlier, and it has a slot for another separate red translucent effect part. The base is plain black, and It isn't solid all the way through. I would have preferred it to be because as it is, it doesn't feel that sturdy when you're carrying and moving the figure around. And personally, I would have wanted a solid clear base or a red translucent one. And lastly, underneath the big middle layer is a smaller plastic tray which houses the rest of the red translucent effect parts. Here I am inspecting them one by one to make sure none are broken. Going back to the base, it is 355 millimeters in diameter for all of you who are wondering. This figure is going to take up more space than your typical scale figure, mainly because it is a quarter scale and it's not just huge vertically, but also horizontally. The red translucent effect parts attached to it extend past the base, so keep that in mind if you're trying to see if you have space for it. As I'm getting ready to put the main figure on the base, you can see that it is wrapped securely in foam and bubble wrap, and each leg is wrapped separately. Because his left foot is already attached to the base, there is a placeholder on the main figure and it was pretty stuck in there. It took me a while to remove because I didn't want to yank it out by force. There is a metal peg on the base that goes under his right foot, and his left leg obviously goes on the left foot that's already attached to the base. I don't really know what I was expecting while I was assembling this, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that he went on easily. Also, this figure surprisingly feels really secure on the base. Initially, I was worried that it might develop a bit of a leaning issue, but I don't really see that happening in the long run. Assembling this figure was pretty easy and straightforward, but I did pull up official photos to make sure I'm putting the parts in the right way. So before sticking the hand in, there's this moon-shaped effect part that attaches to an even bigger red translucent effect part that in turn attaches to the base. The moon-shaped part has an indentation or a recess where the bigger part pushes in to attach them to each other, and once those pieces are joined together, it was pretty easy to just plop on the base because there's already a slot for it, and it does feel pretty secure as well. Next is his right hand. This one's pretty straightforward. I just stuck it in till it felt secure. Lastly, there are two more red translucent effect parts that attach to the main red translucent effect part on the base to extend it, I guess. The first of two go in right here. There's a visible indentation on the piece that's already on the base, and you just slip this separate piece in until it clicks. And as you can see, this long piece looks and feels slightly flimsy with the way it's wobbling. The second and last piece attaches right here. There's also a visible indentation on the piece that's already on the base, and like the previous piece, you just slip it in, though this one didn't really click. And with that, I'm done assembling the quarter scale Satoru Gojo B-style figure from Freen. This figure also surprisingly looks a lot better in person than in photos, and I'm going to get right into my thoughts and comments on this figure because I do have a few. I'm not saying this figure looks better than the Suguru Geto one from the same line, but the difference in how this figure looks in photos and in person is a little insane, to be honest. It doesn't even feel like the same figure. And after seeing it in person, I do think it is quite nice. Not as dynamic as I would have wanted it to be. They definitely could have done so much more with the pose, but I guess they really wanted to capture that one scene from the movie. But having said that, it's not as rigid or as stiff as what the photos make it out to be. It's very subtle, but the way his clothes are creased, especially in the arm that's extended out, or the way his hair blows to the left, it's the small details like that that you'd probably miss in photos, but it gives the figure that extra oomph in real life. There are a few things that I'm not too fond of. This is just me being nitpicky and it doesn't really take away from the figure overall, but I feel like they're still worth mentioning. First off is his eye. It looks a little off to me. I don't know if it's because of how they did the iris. They used a shade of blue that almost looks gray in most lighting and added a lot of unnecessary lines and details in my opinion. Or it could also be because they actually added thick eyelashes, but it feels almost like something you would see on a plastic doll rather than a scale figure. Second is his hair and the way it's shaded. It's a little too purple for my liking. Granted, a lot of Gojo figures based on the Jujutsu Kaisen 0 movie have a purple tinge to their hair because of how it's colored in the movie. It's just very obvious, especially in darker lighting. And since we're on the topic of hair, Gojo has an undercut. So I was expecting the area under the blindfold to be a little smoother than what it is. I feel like it would have looked a lot better or cleaner if it were. Last thing on my list are the red translucent effect parts, specifically the ones that had to be assembled and joined together. There are 3 of them, and this is something you probably wouldn't notice unless you assembled the figure yourself, but because the parts are translucent, the point where the parts join together are very obvious. You can clearly see where one part slots into the other, and this is unfortunately more noticeable in the parts that are a darker shade of red. So do I think this figure is worth it? For his price, I would say it would really depend on whether you like the sculpt or not, because like I said earlier, there are a lot of Satoru Gojo scale figures out there to choose from. Personally, I got mine to match my Suguru Geto one from the same line, so I didn't really put much thought into it. In terms of how the figure looks, maybe it's because he's lanky that he just doesn't photograph well. His pose comes off as quite stiff and a little boring, but it doesn't look as stiff in person. I don't really know how to explain it, but this is one of those figures where if you're on the fence about it, you have to see it for yourself before you completely pass up on it.